What is the best way to lose weight according to science? Is it calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, or clean eating? Well, most of the literature shows that calorie restriction is the most consistent and effective way to lose weight, at least in the short term. And most professionals recommend it as the primary strategy for weight loss, along with moderate changes to diet and exercises. But I'm going to make the case for almost the opposite, using information that isn't even controversial. Here's my thesis. 1. People who maintain healthy body weight long term generally do not experience chronic hunger. And 2. Chronic hunger in weight loss attempts is usually a sign of an ineffective approach, and it may even be counter to your goal. All right? Many people think that regular dieting is a necessary part of maintaining a healthy weight. And by that, I mean ignoring internal signals like hunger in favor of external measures like counting calories or looking at the number on a scale. Or maybe they constantly resist the urge to overeat and never quite feel satisfied by their meals, right? On the other hand, there are people who are reliably able to maintain their weight. They build a diet and eating habits where they simply don't need to do any of these things. They're satiated by their meals, and hunger for them is a reliable signal of food consumption, not something to be overridden. And this should be the goal. But how do we do it? How do we manage our hunger healthfully? Well, there's two characteristics of what I'm going to call clean eating that I find most compelling. And you already know them because they're not even controversial. The first one, eat more fiber. That's fruits and vegetables. And you all know this. And 2, eat less processed sugar and starches, which usually just means carbohydrates where the fiber is removed. But it has a separate effect from just the missing good parts of the fiber. The simple carbohydrates and sugars has its own negative effects on the body. We'll get to the mechanisms of hunger soon, but first I want to look at some cross-cultural evidence and you can see where I'm going. And maybe this will help people get out of their weird American food identity bubble. So let's start with the obvious. North Americans are fatter than Europeans, who are fatter than East Asians. And I want to use these populations as comparable developed nations with access to food and healthcare, right? And if we look at these different cultures, there's one fact that I find just completely devastating to the idea of calorie restricted diets. North Americans use them the most, followed by Europeans, followed by Asians. This is clearly not a cause of healthy weight management. It's a reaction, it's a band aid, and it's a really bad one. Maybe you don't find that as compelling as I do, so we'll keep going. Let's look at what calorie restriction does to hunger in the long term. Chronic hunger often leads to increases of ghrelin, which is a hormone that stimulates hunger. Why? Because this triggers your body's adaptive response to starving. It even lowers your energy expenditure, and so people often feel hungrier after a weight loss diet. And these are long term responses to long term or chronic undereating. And it can take time to normalize. This isn't like a permanent response, but it means that you're not just fighting hunger while you're trying to lose weight, but potentially for long after. And what are the real world results of this? At best, I was able to find studies that showed 1 in 5 people were able to use this strategy long term to maintain their weight loss goals. And this was confounded further by the fact that many people who do this one strategy also incorporate many other strategies as well to try and lose weight. So, why does it consistently work in research settings, and why is it supported by most professionals? So first, these studies are relatively short, usually 4 to 12 weeks, and you can definitely lose weight on a calorie restricted diet in these 4 to 12 weeks. But they often do not look at whether hunger and appetite regulation normalize afterwards. These calorie studies are easy to quantify and control, and therefore they're easy to study. And something like hunger, especially as an independent variable, can be very difficult to measure and kind of easy to discount, right? So, what does my idea of clean eating do to hunger? Let's start with fiber. Fiber slows digestion and it creates more volume in the guts with fewer calories. And it just provides other general health benefits like nutrient absorption and better microbiome. So, in principle, I guess you can go overboard with eating fiber rich foods, but it's one of the simplest, safest, and effective changes that you can make to your diet. And let's look at the other part. Let's look at sugar and refined carbohydrates. When you eat these, there is a rapid absorption into your body, which actually competes with metabolizing fat and protein. So it can take longer while you're eating to get that satiation that signal that tells you I'm done eating, right? So it's not just the excess calories from the sugar, but it can make you want to eat more of everything that you're eating. And it goes deeper. So chronic sugar consumption can actually shift your metabolism away from fat towards glucose. That makes it harder to use fat from your food and that's stored in your body. And so hunger returns sooner looking for carbs, even if there's fat available to consume. And there are subtle differences in how different sugars can relate to hunger, but mostly you can expect these sort of effects. Okay, now if we go back to our population data, these effects are well supported. Europeans eat about 30% more fiber than Americans, and Asians about 60%. And for sugar, Americans get about 18% of their calories from sugar, and 70% of that is refined. Europeans eat substantially less sugar, maybe 10 to 12% of their diet, and less of that is refined sugar. And Asians still much lower, 5 to 7%. That's like a third of the amount of sugar that Americans eat. And less than half of that sugar that they're eating is from refined sources. And that's it. Assuming you're hitting all your basic needs for proteins, vitamins, and minerals, eating better doesn't have to be difficult if you're trying to lose weight. Just focus on these simple changes. But these are indeed complex systems, and there's other variables I personally found less impactful and compelling, but they're still interesting, and sometimes they support my thesis, sometimes they confound it. Let's talk about some of them. Some of the interesting things I found were built around the mechanical signaling towards hunger. So we talked about the chemical ones before, but there's some simple mechanical signals, just like filling up your body, right? So you can look at something like smoothies. People tend to eat more food when it's blended and drunk than if the same food is simply eaten. Apparently, the physical act of chewing your food and mixing your saliva in affects hunger signals. Another, you can eat a cup of grapes and feel more full than an equal number of raisins mixed with water. The same volume, the same nutrients, the same everything, just in a slightly different form. Apparently, the viscous goo from chewed up fruit going through your guts is more satisfying than water with chunks in it. And another, let's look at soda versus soup. Soup tends to be more filling, even if it has less calories, and it's simply just due to the small amounts of nutrients and fiber that it has in it. Soda is basically not filling at all, and this goes back to our sugar discussion, right? Simple. One that I really liked is what happens when you put sugar on your salad versus just eating sugar in fruit. Are these the same things? Let's say they have the same amount of sugar, fiber, nutrients, etc. Still not the same. This time it's because the fruit sugar is inside the plant cells, and there's a whole process of breaking into the cells and getting that sugar out. Whereas if you put the sugar in a dressing on your salad, that is immediately absorbed into your body, and your body recognizes it right away. Okay, one potentially confounder is the portion sizes. Europeans have smaller portions than Americans, and they actually struggle to eat our portions of food when they come here. So, this suggests that Americans aren't eating more just to the quality of food being easier to consume. Apparently, you can just psychologically understand yourself to be full with less food that's given to you. But there's some caveats, of course. So, one, Europeans actually spend more time eating less food. So, I suggest if you're going to eat less food, simply eat slower. And this should track for anyone who has quickly thrown back a microwave burrito for lunch. It can be filling, but it's not necessarily satiating, right? And the second confounder to this is it actually takes time for people to adjust to eating new food, not just the flavors, but the quality of food, the cooking, the fat content, the sugar content, all that things can mess with your hunger signals, and you have to kind of train yourself to learn to eat different food. And it's funny because Americans are especially bad at switching diets. They feel less satiated with different quality food. And this makes sense too. But it suggests that Americans aren't just bad at trying new foods because of the flavor, but that our food quality is actually quite different from the rest of the world. Okay, so I want to talk of fats as well because I'm talking about clean eating, and fats often come up in this discussion. What are good fats, bad fats? I'm on the train where most fat is fine, including saturated fats and animal fats, which I think are way overly demonized. Again, with some caveats. So let's first talk. Fat can actually enhance your satiety hormones, making it hard to binge or overconsume things like eggs and steaks, etc. But they can be extra fattening when you combine fats with processed sugar and carbs. Because again, we're talking about sugar creating bad hunger signals. And when you mix it with the calorie dense fat, okay, now we're off. Um, in terms of bad fat, I think there's some good evidence to an overabundance of omega 6s to omega 3s, leading to inflammation. And that can certainly be an issue for people, but I think that's secondary to our discussion of weight gain. Also, cooking at high temperatures can do the same sort of thing. But one thing it does do for our discussion is it removes the water. So, again, you get that raisin effect. And I want to look at one potentially confounding study. It's a very famous study done by Purina for dogs. It's called the Purina Lifetime Lab Study. And basically, sibling dogs were split into two groups. One was able to eat freely, and the other was on a calorie restricted diet. And these dogs were tracked for their whole life. The restricted group had better body composition, metabolic markers, and they even lived longer. And the most straightforward interpretation probably supports the idea of calorie restriction. But I think there's still room for interpretation that supports my thesis. First, this is highly processed and it has low moisture and low fiber. At least for humans, these are dogs. So, again, it's hard to translate this as a one to one diet and know exactly how much fiber dogs need versus how much fiber human needs. And to translate hunger onto human miles is tricky, right? So I think that's a big confounder. One thing I will concede is that whatever challenges, potential problems, health issues there are from chronic hunger, I think being chronically overweight is almost certainly worse. I didn't want to open up the can of worms about exercise, but there's one thing that's been my latest hobby horse, and it fits really well into this discussion of weight loss. And I like it because it goes one step below the weightlifting versus cardio debate that I see a lot online right now. So, one overlooked factor that I think is really important is the exercise weight bearing. That means, are you putting forces through your abdomen and your legs? That means running and hiking over biking and standing lifts over machines. And it's because they recruit more muscle stabilizers and they actually induce systemic fatigue, which you'll notice is the opposite of what most bodybuilders suggest. They want to reduce systemic fatigue and focus locally on building muscles, right?